I was pretty surprised, and admittedly also quite disappointed to find that the most popular recycled tennis strings on the market, Luxilon's Eco line, all have pretty bad reviews. Lots of reports of poor durability, premature breakage, bad tension maintenance, and like a hollow, brittle feel, so I just never felt like trying them. The other kind of like eco poly that I hit recently was Gamma Sapphire. It's supposed to be biodegradable, but again, I couldn't describe it as any better than fine. Maybe that's what you expect from Gamma, but I know that there is a cult following for some strings by them. So at this point, I was about to just write off recycled environmentally friendly strings on the whole, until I got an explanation of why it's so hard to create recycled strings that play well. But before I bore you with that technical explanation, I want to share with you a graph, because I know you guys love graphs, to help you understand where ReString Vivo sits on the market and why it might be the only recycled string you should even consider spending your money on. And before we go any further, I do want to make some disclosures. I have a professional relationship with ReString. We've been affiliate partners for a couple years now, so you might want to consider this as less of an objective review and more of just a product showcase. That said, me, Simon, and Ali, none of us are going to hold back our opinions. We're going to be as critical as we see fit. Nothing is slipping by us just because we get paid. To us, it's more valuable, especially in the long term, that you hear our honest truth rather than me trying to sell you 20 sets of this today only for you to not trust me on every other review that I do. So this is ReString's own graph. On the y-axis we have like amount of snapback, and then on the x-axis there's general power levels. As you can see, their first two strings, 0 and Sync, are basically at maximum snapback, with 0 being their most powerful option and Sync being their least powerful or most controlled. Then we've got their third string, their newest option, ReString Vivo, which sits dead center in the middle. And here's how it compares to a few other strings on the market, just to give you an idea of where things actually sit. And I think this graph is interesting because it shows that snapback isn't always the most desirable trait. We hear about it kind of online in the YouTube space as being pretty desirable, but there's a use case for all sorts of playing attributes and all sorts of strings. Sometimes you're going to want a lot of snapback, but sometimes you might want very little snapback. And ReString Vivo, that's a string for like the best of both worlds, or maybe if you're a glass half empty type of person, the worst of all worlds. It kind of sits in the middle. But back to why it's so hard to make a recycled string in the first place. I'm not sure if you've ever been to a recycling plant, but they're kind of dirty. Plastic bottles, they're not always rinsed thoroughly. They've got paper labels, glue on them. They just pick up dirt from existing on a planet that is literally named after dirt. And to reuse this plastic, to turn it into a tennis string like this, that recycled plastic has to be cleaned. It has to be purged of as many contaminants as possible. Leaving in any dirt on the raw material is going to lead to the qualities we discussed earlier. That bad durability, that kind of chalky, hollow feel, and what I would consider to be even worse, inconsistencies from batch to batch. Now, this is probably the biggest challenge with using RPET or RPET. You can't control how many contaminants are going in with each batch of recycled plastic. Before it's cleaned, you don't know how dirty it is, so you don't really know how much you have to clean it. And this is why ReString Vivo is going to be a little bit more expensive than some of the other ReStrings. ReString has set an unprecedented standard for cleaning the raw material prior to its incorporation into a tennis string, ensuring that it will be consistent not only from day to day, but also from batch to batch, so that when you buy ReString Vivo on day 1 and then you buy it 6 months later, you get that same playability that you expect from ReString. The goal with ReString Vivo was not to create a string that plays well for a recycled string. It was to create a string that plays well. So how does it play? Well, we're going to talk to Ali, a former women's ITF player, Simon, a lowly like 2.5 player, and me, your resident pro.
My initial thoughts with ReString Vivo were that it was a really easy string to jump into. Unlike some of the other strings that I've had with ReString, like the Zero, I didn't find that it needed any break-in period. It was immediately grabbing the ball, and it had good snapback, good feedback, and pretty much everything that I want out of a string.
My initial thoughts with the ReString Vivo is I love the color. I gotta say this blue is my favorite color, and it adds really a pretty aesthetic to the Pure Drive, which is the racket I've been using lately.
So I personally tried a bunch of different setups with Vivo. Tried it in at least 3 different rackets: the T-Fight 305S, the Yonex E-Zone 100, which it's not shown here, but I do have B-roll of it to prove that I used it. And then I tried it in both a full bed and a hybrid setup in my Pure Aero Rafa. I will say there is a little bit of that brittle hollowness on the more connected rackets. So this Pure Aero Rafa has no dampening tech. So compared to something like Toro Line O Toro, which I think playability is actually relatively close between these two, that kind of brittleness in a full bed does come through with Vivo, whereas like Otoro or Slinko Mach 10, 2 other pretty solid all-around options, don't have that kind of like brittle or hollow feel. But if you have a more muted racket with dampening tech, like this E-Zone 100 for example, I really don't think you're going to feel that brittleness. It's still, there's enough muting with this type of racket that you can't feel as much of those subtleties. So the feel was a complete non-issue with something like this E-Zone. It still felt really pure, really loud, really snappy. In the T-Fight, I didn't really find any hollowness. I'm finding, even though this is a really raw racket, that it doesn't really let you feel nuances between strings, whereas I find that the Aero lets me explore those a little more.
I used it in 2 rackets, my whiteout and the E-Zone. And in the whiteout, it definitely gave a lot more feedback. I think that racket in general is just a more feedback heavy racket. And that's where some of that tinniness kind of shone through. But in the E-Zone, which is such a solid frame, I didn't get any of that. It almost felt like a plush string in comparison. So depending on what racket you use, you could get a wide variety of feels out of this string, I think.
Like as soon as my racket was freshly strung, I felt like it took a little bit to break into the string. It's a very soft string compared to, I don't know, my other performance strings like the M8 or the Confidential.
In terms of feel, I will say this is pretty neutral. It's a bit on the softer side of medium, I would say. Definitely not stiff, though not necessarily all the way towards like a pure comfort string. The feel again is pretty medium, like it's not super raw, but it's also not super muted, so it should work in a pretty wide range of rackets. And I think that kind of was the goal with Vivo in the first place. Generally, it's just supposed to like hit every single box. Maybe it's not going to exceed in any particular category, but it should play at least up to standard. And that has been definitely my experience. Spin was quite solid there. This is a shaped string, so you do get that grip on the ball, that ball bite, that ball grab, but it's not going to blow you away.
Very easy to swing through and create lots of feelings with it. So creating topspin, creating slice, swinging through is pretty quick. It's pretty easy.
It's far from ReString Zero levels of spin, not as good as Toro Line O Toro. I would say still in the same realm as what Slinko is doing right now. Nothing with the crazy snapback and nothing with a crazy edge, but just medium, so you get a nice blend of spin and predictability.
They do claim that it's recycled. Should I say claim? I don't know. They do claim that it is recycled, and I think that honestly that's probably the main selling point in the market for me. It isn't exceptional at any one thing, but when you put it in the marketplace that really has no recycled string options that are worth using, I think this is a strong and compelling case.
Control is also pretty solid here. Because that feel isn't too muted, you do get enough ball connection that you can understand what's going on the string bed, which I think does increase sensations of control. But it's not going to be as strong as like a full bed of Sync, a full bed of Tour Sniper, a full bed of Slinko Confidential or Lynx Tour, but it is still going to be better, I think, than like definitely better than ReString Zero, definitely better than like a Hyper-G Soft, and I would say probably even better than a full bed of Mach 10. Power levels are relatively high again because it is a softer string. I don't think power is quite as high as the previously mentioned Slinko Mach 10 or Hyper-G Soft. I would put it slightly above Polytour Pro, definitely more powerful than Hyper-G or Confidential, most of the Grapple Snake strings.
However, about an hour and a half into my hitting, I would say the string felt like it wasn't giving as much anymore. So it took 15 minutes to get to a comfortable spot, and it took an hour and a half to fully lose it. It's playable after that, but it doesn't give you as much control. So there's a little bit of launchiness when you're hitting around hour two and a half. After that, it's just laziness to not change the string.
I didn't really find that it was launchy, but that launchiness does come into play as the string starts to age. So because this isn't like a super high snapback string, it doesn't retain that slickness and that spin potential and that snapback over time as well as your typical suspects from ReString, so it will age a little bit quicker. I don't think it ages as fast as like Hyper-G or Alu Power or RPET Blast, but I don't think it lasts as long as most of the Toro line strings.
What I didn't like, in my racket, I did notice some of the sort of tinniness that Beckett has mentioned before. Honestly, nothing too crazy. It was a comfortable string. The main problem I had was that it just didn't seem to last as long as some of the strings that I've come to regularly put into my rotation.
I think where performance definitely starts to improve is when you put something like ReString Sync in the crosses. That turns this setup into much more durable because you get that snapback from Sync. You get a little bit firmer, crisper feel from Sync as well. I did not personally put ReString Zero in the crosses for this one because I thought the power level was pretty decent. I wasn't really looking for more power or spin. I was just looking for durability, but to retain the natural character of the string, which is why I really like Sync in the crosses. That's just generally how I find it works with pretty much every string I pair it with. My overall thoughts with Vivo are, it's a good string. It checks every box just like it's supposed to. It plays better than pretty much any of the other like Ego strings that I've tried. But it didn't blow me away in any specific category. Specifically, I'm not getting the kind of spin or playability duration that I kind of expect from the other ReString offerings. So I wouldn't say it's like at the top of my list. I prefer Sync. I'll put a list on my screen of all the various ReString hybrids and setups. I would put ranked in order of best to worst.
Closing thoughts, I really like the color. I like that it's about sustainability. It's not something that you really think about when it comes to a tennis string. And in the marketplace, there aren't really that many options. So if you're in the market for something that's a little bit better for the environment, and you want something that you can still use on a regular basis, I think Vivo will be a great option for you.
Because Vivo is just like not an extreme string, I don't have anything super interesting to say about it. I think it's a good string. I don't think it falls in my top 10 strings all time. But if you've been looking for something with more of an eco focus, I think this is the only one worth considering for sure.
That's it. I don't have anything else. I'm making it up now. Okay, good.
Good job.